The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Clara Norton stepped down onto the packed earth of North Platte, Nebraska, with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. It was August of 1878, and the merciless sun beat down on her dark traveling dress like a physical weight, but she barely noticed the heat. All she could think about was the letter folded in her reticule, and the shame that had driven her halfway across the country to this rough frontier town where nobody knew her name or her mistakes. She had left St. Louis 3 weeks ago with nothing but 2 carpetbags, $40 sewn into the lining of her coat, and a carefully worded advertisement she had answered from a widow seeking a companion and helper for her boarding house. The lie had been easy to write in her response letter. Yes, she had excellent references. Yes, she was of good moral character. Yes, she had never been married and had no entanglements. The truth sat heavy in her belly, literally, a secret she could hide for perhaps another month or two before her condition became obvious to anyone with eyes. Clara was 22 years old and completely alone in the world. Her mother had died when she was 16, and her father had followed 2 years later, leaving her to make her own way as a seamstress in a boarding house run by a stern German woman who tolerated no impropriety. But Clara had made the gravest impropriety of all. She had believed the promises of a charming banker's son who had sworn he would marry her, who had painted pictures of a grand wedding and a house on the good side of town. Instead, when she had tearfully told him about the baby, he had looked at her with cold eyes and told her he was already engaged to a railroad magnate's daughter. The wedding was planned for October. He had given her $50 and told her to take care of it or disappear. She had taken the money and disappeared, but not to take care of it in the way he meant. Despite everything, despite the shame and the fear and the way her landlady had looked at her when she noticed Clara's morning sickness, she wanted this baby. This child was hers, and she would protect it even if it cost her everything. The problem was that everything was exactly what it might cost. A woman alone with an illegitimate child had no prospects, no future, no hope of respectability. She would be turned out of any decent employment, shunned by society, left to scrape by in the most desperate circumstances. Unless she could somehow build a new life before anyone discovered the truth. North Platte was her gamble. It was far enough from St. Louis that no one would know her, raw enough that perhaps people would be too busy surviving to ask too many questions. And the widow's advertisement had seemed kind, asking for help rather than demanding qualifications. Clara had pictured a motherly woman who might, just might, show some compassion when the truth eventually came out. Now, standing in the street with dust coating her hem and the sun baking the top of her head, she felt her courage wavering. The town stretched out before her in a collection of wooden buildings that looked like they had been thrown up in a hurry and might blow away in a strong wind. Cowboys lounged against hitching posts, watching her with frank curiosity. A wagon rattled past, kicking up more dust. Somewhere a dog barked, and the sharp crack of a hammer on anvil rang out from a blacksmith shop. She picked up her bags and started walking toward the address the widow had provided, her steps careful on the uneven boardwalk. Men tipped their hats as she passed, and she kept her eyes down, trying to look respectable and unmemorable at the same time. The boarding house was 3 streets over, a 2-story structure that had once been painted white, but now wore a weathered gray coat. A sign hung from the porch, "Rooms and Meals, Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher, proprietress." Clara climbed the steps and knocked. Her mouth was dry and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine under all her layers. The door opened, and a tall, thin woman with iron gray hair and suspicious eyes looked her up and down. "I am looking for Mrs. Fletcher," Clara said, proud that her voice came out steady. "I am Clara Norton. I wrote to you about the position." The woman's expression did not change. "I expected you last week. The stage was delayed in Omaha. There was trouble with one of the horses," Mrs. Fletcher sniffed. "Well, you are here now. Come in." The interior was dim and hot, smelling of boiled cabbage and old wood. Mrs. Fletcher led her through a cramped parlor into a kitchen where a large stove radiated even more heat into the already stifling air. "I have 8 boarders currently, all men. Ranchers, cowboys, a clerk from the land office, and a gambler I should probably throw out, but he pays on time. I need help with the cooking, the washing, the cleaning, all of it. My rheumatism has gotten so bad I can barely manage, and my daughter was supposed to come help me, but she married a fool and moved to California instead." Clara nodded, setting down her bags. "I can do all of that, madam. I am a hard worker." "You look pale as milk. Are you sickly?" "No, madam, just tired from the journey." Mrs. Fletcher's eyes narrowed. "Why did a young woman like you come all the way out here? You running from something?" Clara's heart stuttered, but she had prepared for this question. "My father died 6 months ago. He was a clerk, and there was no money left. I had been keeping house for him, and when he passed, I had no family and no means to support myself. I thought the West might offer better opportunities." It was close enough to the truth that she could say it without flinching. Mrs. Fletcher studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Opportunities, hum? Well, I can offer you room and board and $3 a week. You will have the attic room. It is hot in summer and cold in winter, but it is private. I expect breakfast on the table at 6, supper at 7, and the rest of the day you will be cleaning, doing laundry, mending, and helping me with whatever needs doing. Sunday afternoons you are free to attend services or do as you please, but I expect you to be respectable. I will not tolerate any carrying on with the boarders, do you understand?" "Yes, madam, I understand completely." "Good. Come along. I will show you your room, and then you can start on the supper. The men will be hungry, and I have not even started the beans yet." The attic room was exactly as described. A narrow space under the eaves with a sloped ceiling, a small window that looked out over the backyard, an iron bedstead, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. It was hot as an oven, and Clara could imagine it would be an icebox come winter, but it was hers and it was private, and that was more than she had dared hope for. She unpacked quickly, hanging her 2 other dresses on pegs on the wall and tucking her undergarments and nightdress into the trunk. The letter from the banker's son she kept in her reticule, though she did not know why. Perhaps as a reminder of her own foolishness. Perhaps as fuel for the anger that sometimes burned through her fear. By the time she made it back down to the kitchen, Mrs. Fletcher had a pot of beans soaking and was looking at her with something that might have been approval. "You did not take long. Good. Now can you make biscuits?" "Yes, madam." "Then get started. There is flour in that bin, lard in the crock, and buttermilk in the icebox. I need 3 dozen at least." Clara tied on an apron and set to work. Her hands knew the motions from years of helping her mother and then keeping house for her father. Mix the dry ingredients, cut in the lard, add the buttermilk, knead just enough and not too much, cut and place in the pan. It was soothing, in a way, to do something familiar. For a few minutes she could pretend she was back in St. Louis in her father's tiny kitchen, before everything had gone so wrong. The boarders began arriving just before 7, trooping in through the back door in a cloud of dust and sweat, and the smell of horses and hard work. They were a rough-looking bunch, weathered and sunburned, with calloused hands and squinting eyes. They took their seats at the long table in the dining room, and Mrs. Fletcher introduced Clara as her new helper. The men nodded politely and then fell on the food like they had not eaten in a week. Clara served and refilled bowls and tried not to meet anyone's eyes directly. She had learned in St. Louis that it was better not to draw attention, better to be invisible. But she could feel them looking at her anyway, curious about the new woman in the house. One man in particular seemed to watch her more than the others. He sat at the far end of the table, tall even sitting down, with broad shoulders and hands that dwarfed his coffee cup. His hair was dark brown and a little too long, curling at his collar, and his face was all hard angles except for his eyes, which were a startling blue-green, like deep water. He did not stare rudely, but every time she glanced in his direction, she found him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Not lustful, which she was familiar with from other men. Something else, something that made her nervous in a different way. When supper was over and the men had dispersed to their rooms or out into the town, Clara helped Mrs. Fletcher clean up the dishes. Her back ached and her feet hurt, and she felt the familiar queasiness rising in her throat that meant she would probably be sick later, but she kept working. She could not afford to show weakness now. "You did well tonight," Mrs. Fletcher said grudgingly as they finished drying the last pot. "Better than I expected, truth be told. These men are not easy to cook for. They eat enough for an army." "Thank you, madam." That man at the end of the table, the tall one. His name is Xander Garrett. He is the foreman at the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of here. Stays here in town 2 or 3 nights a week when he has business. He is a good man, pays his bills, does not cause trouble. "But I saw him looking at you." Clara's stomach clenched. "I did not encourage any attention, madam, I promise." "I did not say you did. But you are young and pretty, and these men do not see many unattached women out here. Just be careful. I meant what I said about respectability." "Yes, madam." That night, alone in her sweltering attic room, Clara pressed her hand to her still flat stomach and let herself cry for the first time since leaving St. Louis. She cried for her lost innocence, for her foolishness, for her mother who would have been so disappointed, for her father who had loved her and would have protected her if he had lived. She cried for the baby who would come into the world branded as illegitimate through no fault of its own. And she cried because she was so tired and so scared and so alone. But when the tears were spent, she washed her face in the tepid water from the pitcher, changed into her nightdress, and lay down on the narrow bed. She had made it this far. She would make it farther. She had no other choice. The next morning, she was up before dawn to start breakfast. Mrs. Fletcher showed her where everything was kept and then left her to it, saying her joints hurt too much to stand for long in the mornings. Clara fried bacon and eggs, made more biscuits, and put out butter and jam and the last of a loaf of bread she had baked the night before after the dishes were done. Coffee boiled in a big pot on the back of the stove, strong enough to strip paint. The boarders came down in 1s and 2s, grunting good mornings and falling on the food with the same enthusiasm as the night before. Xander Garrett was the last to arrive, ducking his head to clear the doorframe. In the morning light, Clara could see that he was probably close to 30, his face lined from squinting into the sun and wind. He wore a clean shirt and his hair was damp like he had just washed. When he saw her standing by the stove, he stopped and touched the brim of his hat. "Morning, miss." "You must be the new helper Mrs. Fletcher told us about." His voice was deep and quiet with a soft drawl that spoke of somewhere farther south. Clara nodded, keeping her eyes on the skillet. "Yes, sir, Clara Norton. Xander Garrett, pleased to make your acquaintance." "Likewise," she murmured, though she did not feel pleased so much as anxious. There was something about the way he looked at her, steady and direct, like he could see right through her carefully constructed lies. He took his seat and ate quickly, then stood and put his hat on. "Thank you for the fine breakfast, Miss Norton. Best I have had in a while. You are welcome." He left with the others, and Clara let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Mrs. Fletcher came into the kitchen, moving slowly, and raised an eyebrow. "Told you he was watching you." "I did not encourage him, madam. I know that. Xander is not the type to press unwanted attention on a woman, but he is interested, that much is plain. You could do worse, you know. He is steady, respectable, has a good position, probably looking to settle down." Clara's throat tightened. "I am not looking for a husband, madam. I just want to work and save my money." Mrs. Fletcher shrugged. "Suit yourself. But you are young and pretty and unattached. Out here, that is a rare thing. Men will notice whether you want them to or not. Best you know how to handle it." Clara spent the rest of the morning washing dishes, sweeping floors, and helping Mrs. Fletcher prepare a chicken for supper. The older woman's hands were gnarled and painful looking, the knuckles swollen, and Clara felt a pang of sympathy. Life out here was hard on everyone, but especially on women who had no one to help them. In the afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher took a nap and Clara tackled the mountain of laundry. There was a yard out back with clotheslines strung between posts, and a big iron pot over a fire pit for boiling water. She hauled buckets from the pump, built up the fire, and began the exhausting process of washing, rinsing, wringing, and hanging. Her hands were red and raw by the time she finished, and the queasiness in her stomach had returned with a vengeance. She made it to the outhouse just in time to be sick, and then leaned against the rough wooden wall, breathing hard and feeling like she might faint. "Miss Norton, are you all right?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly fell. She turned to see Xander Garrett standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands, concern written across his face. "I am fine," she managed. "Just the heat." "You do not look fine. You look about ready to keel over. Come on, let me get you into the shade." Before she could protest, he had taken her arm, gently but firmly, and was guiding her to the back porch where there was a bench under the eaves. He made her sit, then went to the pump and came back with a tin cup of cold water. "Drink this slowly. And take off that bonnet. Let yourself cool down." Clara obeyed, too shaky to argue. The water helped and the shade helped, and after a few minutes the world stopped spinning quite so alarmingly. Xander stood a few feet away, watching her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "Thank you," she said finally. "I am not sure what came over me. This heat can be dangerous if you are not used to it, and you have been working flat out since dawn from what I can see. Mrs. Fletcher is getting her money's worth out of you. I do not mind hard work. I did not say you minded it. But there is hard work and there is working yourself sick, and you looked about 2 minutes from the latter." Clara set down the cup and stood up, too quickly. She swayed, and he was there instantly, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. His grip was warm and strong, and for a moment she had the strangest urge to lean into him, to let someone else be strong for just a minute. But she pulled away instead, putting distance between them. "I am fine now. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Garrett, but I need to get back to work." "At least rest a few more minutes." "I cannot. There is supper to prepare." She hurried back into the house before he could say anything else, her heart pounding. She could not afford kindness. Kindness would make her weak, would make her want things she could not have. Better to keep her distance, to stay invisible, to get through each day until her baby came and she could figure out what to do next. But that evening at supper, Xander Garrett watched her again with that same steady, thoughtful gaze, and when she refilled his coffee cup, he smiled at her. It was a small smile, barely there, but it transformed his whole face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger and almost unbearably kind. Clara looked away quickly and did not look back. The days fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, breakfast for 8 hungry men, Dishes, cleaning, laundry, mending, baking, supper, more dishes, and finally collapsing into bed in her hot attic room. Mrs. Fletcher was not a cruel employer, but she was exacting, and there was always more work to be done. Clara pushed herself hard, partly because she needed the job and partly because exhaustion kept her from thinking too much about the future. Xander Garrett was in town 3 nights a week like clockwork, and every time he was there, he watched her. Not in a leering way, not like some of the other men who occasionally made comments or let their eyes linger too long. He just watched, quiet and thoughtful, and sometimes he would do small things to help her. Carrying in firewood when he saw she was struggling with the heavy load. Fixing the pump handle when it broke. Moving a heavy pot on the stove when he saw her straining. He never made a fuss about it, just did it and went on his way, but Clara noticed. She tried not to notice. She tried to keep her walls up and her distance maintained. But it was hard when he was so unfailingly kind, so quietly respectful. He never pressed her, never asked prying questions, never did anything that could be considered improper. He just existed in her orbit, steady as the sunrise, and slowly, against her better judgment, she began to look forward to the days when he was there. 2 months passed. Summer began to fade into early fall, and the brutal heat eased into something more bearable. Clara's dresses began to feel tight around the middle, and she started wearing an apron all the time, tied high to hide the gentle swell of her belly. She was nearly 4 months along now, and soon it would be impossible to conceal. The thought filled her with dread. One evening in late September, after supper was cleared away and most of the boarders had gone out, Clara was sweeping the dining room when Xander appeared in the doorway. He had his hat in his hands again, turning it nervously, and his expression was serious. "Miss Norton, might I have a word with you?" Her heart jumped into her throat. "I am very busy, Mr. Garrett. It will only take a moment, please." There was something in his tone that made it impossible to refuse. She set down the broom and folded her hands in front of her, trying to look composed. "Very well." He stepped into the room, still keeping a respectful distance. "I have been wanting to speak with you for some time now, but I did not want to presume or make you uncomfortable. But I cannot keep silent any longer." Oh no. Clara felt ice forming in her stomach. "Mr. Garrett, please let me finish. I know I am not much to look at and I am just a ranch foreman, not a man of means. But I have a good job and I save my money, and I own a small piece of land outside of town where I am building a house. I am a hard worker and I do not drink to excess, and I have never raised a hand to a woman or child. And I have come to admire you greatly, Miss Norton. You are the most courageous, hard-working, kind woman I have ever met, and I would be honored if you would allow me to court you." Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. This was the last thing she had expected, the worst possible complication. "Mr. Garrett, I am very flattered, but I cannot, if it is too soon, I understand. I am not asking you to give me an answer right away. Just think about it. I would treat you with nothing but respect, I promise you that. We could take it slow, just talk, get to know each other. I think we could have a good life together." The terrible thing was that part of her wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that this kind, steady man could be the answer to all her problems. But she could not build a future on a lie, and she could not trap him into taking on another man's child without telling him the truth. "Mr. Garrett, you do not know me. You do not know anything about me. Then let me get to know you. That is all I am asking." Clara closed her eyes. She could feel tears threatening and she could not fall apart now. "I cannot. I am sorry." "Is there someone else? Someone back east?" The ironic laugh escaped before she could stop it. "No, there is no one." "Then why not give me a chance? Because I am carrying another man's child." "Because I am not who you think I am. because you deserve better than a ruined woman with nothing to offer but shame and scandal. But she could not say any of that out loud. So instead she just repeated, "I am sorry, Mr. Garrett. I cannot." She saw the disappointment in his eyes, quickly hidden. He put his hat on and nodded. "I understand. I apologize for bothering you, Miss Norton. I will not mention it again." He turned and walked out, and Clara stood there in the empty dining room with tears sliding down her cheeks, and her hand pressed to her stomach where the baby was starting to flutter and move. After that night, Xander was still polite and respectful, but the warmth was gone. He did not watch her anymore, did not go out of his way to help. He ate his meals and went about his business and treated her like he would treat any hired help. It was what she wanted, Clara told herself. It was safer this way, but she missed the warmth of his gaze more than she wanted to admit. October arrived, and with it cooler weather and the first hints of winter on the wind. Clara was 4.5 months along now, and even with the apron and her loosest dress, the swell of her belly was becoming noticeable. Mrs. Fletcher had not said anything yet, but Clara caught her looking sometimes, and she knew it was only a matter of time. The crisis came on a Tuesday evening. Supper had been served and Clara was in the kitchen washing dishes when Mrs. Fletcher came in and closed the door behind her. Her face was stern and Clara's heart sank. "How far along are you?" There was no point in lying. "Nearly 5 months, madam, and the father—" "There is no father. I mean there is, but he is not. He will not. He does not want anything to do with the child or with me." Mrs. Fletcher's lips pressed into a thin line. "You lied to me. You said you had no entanglements. I know. I am sorry. I was desperate and I did not know what else to do. You brought shame and scandal into my house under false pretenses." "Yes, madam." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I understand if you want me to leave. Just please give me a day or two to figure out where to go." Mrs. Fletcher was silent for a long moment, and then she sighed. "Lord help me, I should throw you out this instant. But I am not a cruel woman, and I know what it is like to be young and foolish and to make mistakes. My own daughter was born 7 months after my wedding, if you take my meaning. The difference was that I had a husband to give her a name, even if he was a no-good scoundrel who left us 6 months later." Clara looked up, hardly daring to hope. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying you can stay until the baby comes, but only if you agree to certain conditions. You will continue to work as long as you are able. You will conduct yourself with absolute propriety, and you will tell anyone who asks that you are a widow, that your husband died before you came here. I will not have scandal attached to my establishment." "Yes, madam. Thank you, madam. I will do exactly as you say. And after the baby comes, we will figure out what to do then. Perhaps the church can help find a family to take the child. It would have a better life that way." Clara's arms instinctively wrapped around her middle. I will think about it." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened slightly. "I know you think you want to keep it now, but you need to think about what is best for the child. An illegitimate baby has no future, especially not with a mother who has no means of support. At least think about it." "I will. And thank you, truly. I will not give you any reason to regret this kindness." But 2 days later, everything changed again. Clara was bringing in firewood from the pile in the yard when she heard raised voices from inside the house. One of them was Mrs. Fletcher. The other was her son Robert, who lived on a farm 10 miles away and rarely visited. Clara set down the firewood quietly and moved closer to the window. "You are harboring an unmarried pregnant woman under your roof, Mother. Do you have any idea what that does to your reputation?" "Keep your voice down, Robert. And she is a widow, or at least that is what she will tell people." "Oh, please. Do you think people are fools? A pretty young thing shows up out of nowhere, no wedding ring, no mention of a dead husband until suddenly she is showing. People will talk." Let them talk. I need the help, and she is a good worker. What you need is to maintain your respectability so that decent people continue to board here. I am telling you, you need to send her away before she ruins you. This is my house, Robert, not yours. I will make my own decisions. Fine. But do not come crying to me when your business collapses, because no respectable person wants to stay under the same roof as a fallen woman. Clara heard footsteps, and she hurried back to the woodpile and began loading her arms. Robert Fletcher stormed out the back door, saw her, and curled his lip. "You should be ashamed of yourself," he spat, then climbed onto his horse and rode away. That night, Mrs. Fletcher was silent and withdrawn through supper. After the dishes were done, she told Clara to sit down. "I have been thinking about what Robert said. Much as I hate to admit it, he has a point. If word gets around about your situation, it could hurt my business. Most of my boarders are decent men who would not care, but their families might, or the church ladies, or any number of other people whose good opinion I need." Clara felt her world tilting. "Please, Mrs. Fletcher, I have nowhere else to go. I know that, child, and I am not throwing you out. But I think you need to seriously consider your options. Have you thought any more about giving the baby up for adoption? I cannot. I know it would be better for everyone, but I cannot do it." Mrs. Fletcher rubbed her forehead. "Then you need to find a husband, and quickly. A man willing to give the child his name and provide for you both. That is the only way you will have any kind of decent future. What man would marry me knowing I am carrying another man's child? A desperate one. An old one. Someone who needs a housekeeper and does not care about the particulars. Or," she paused, "or someone who cares about you enough to overlook it." Clara thought immediately of Xander Garrett, then pushed the thought away. "There is no one like that. Are you certain? Because I have eyes, girl. I have seen the way Xander Garrett looks at you. He asked to court you, did he not? How did you know that? I may be old, but I am not blind. And Xander is not exactly subtle. Did you refuse him?" "Of course I refused him. How could I do anything else? You could have told him the truth." "And watch him walk away in disgust." "No, thank you." Mrs. Fletcher shook her head. "You do not know Xander Garrett very well if you think he would do that. That man has more honor and compassion in his little finger than most men have in their whole bodies. He might surprise you. Or he might not, and I will not trap him into something out of pity. Better pity than nothing. Better a marriage of convenience than no marriage at all." Mrs. Fletcher stood up stiffly. "I am not saying you have to decide tonight, but think about it, Clara, for your sake and for the baby's sake. Sometimes pride is a luxury we cannot afford." That night, Clara lay awake in her attic room, staring at the ceiling and feeling her baby move inside her. She was trapped between impossible choices. Give up her child and live with that grief forever. Try to raise the baby alone and condemn them both to poverty and shame. Or marry someone she barely knew and hope that he would not come to hate her for deceiving him. None of the options were good. But as the hours ticked by and exhaustion finally began to claim her, she realized that Mrs. Fletcher was right. Sometimes you did not get to choose between good options and bad options. Sometimes you only got to choose between bad and worse. The question was which was which. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Clara went through the motions of her work, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about Xander Garrett, about the kindness in his eyes and the steadiness of his presence. About the way he had helped her without being asked, the way he had looked at her like she was something precious and worth protecting. But was it fair to him to trap him with the truth? And what if Mrs. Fletcher was wrong? What if he did walk away in disgust, or worse? What if he agreed out of some misguided sense of honor and then spent the rest of his life resenting her? On Thursday evening, Xander was back for his usual stay. Clara avoided looking at him during supper, but she was acutely aware of his presence. After the meal, as she was clearing plates, he stood and helped her stack them, his hands brushing hers briefly. The contact sent a jolt through her that she tried to ignore. "Miss Norton, might I speak with you for a moment? Outside, if you do not mind." Her heart began to pound. "I do not think that would be appropriate, Mr. Garrett. Please. It is important." Something in his tone made her look up, and what she saw in his face made her breath catch. He looked worried, almost anxious, which was so unlike his usual calm demeanor that she found herself nodding. "Very well. Give me a moment to finish here." She helped Mrs. Fletcher with the dishes, then took off her apron and went out to the back porch. Xander was waiting there, leaning against the railing and looking out at the darkening sky. When he heard her step, he turned and gestured to the bench. "Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. I know you made it clear you were not interested in my courtship, and I have tried to respect that. But I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out." Clara sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I am listening." He took a deep breath. "I heard Mrs. Fletcher's son here the other day. I was upstairs and the window was open, and I could not help but overhear some of what he said about your situation." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "I see. I am not telling you this to embarrass you or judge you. I am telling you because I want you to know that it does not change anything for me. If anything, it makes me admire you more." She looked up at him, shocked. "What? You came all the way out here alone, trying to build a life for yourself and your child? That takes more courage than most people have. You have been working yourself to the bone to earn an honest living, holding your head up despite what people might think. That is not something to be ashamed of, Miss Norton. That is something to be proud of." Tears were sliding down her cheeks before she could stop them. "You do not understand. I was foolish. I believed promises that were never meant to be kept. I brought this on myself. Maybe you were foolish to trust someone who did not deserve it. But the real fool is the man who walked away from you and his own child. Any man would be lucky to have you, and I meant what I said before. I would still like to court you, if you will allow it. And if things go well between us, I would be honored to give your child my name and raise him or her as my own." Clara stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "I know enough. I know you are kind and hardworking and brave. I know you make the best biscuits I have ever tasted, and you never complain even when you are clearly exhausted. I know you have a good heart, because I have seen how you treat Mrs. Fletcher with patience even when she is sharp with you, and how you speak gently to the men even when they are rude. That is enough for me. But the child is not yours. Everyone will know that. Let them know. I do not care what people think. I care about doing what is right, and it seems to me that you and your baby need someone to stand by you. I would like to be that someone if you will let me." Clara covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. "I do not understand why you are being so kind to me. What do you get out of this? The chance to build a life with a good woman. The chance to be a husband and a father. The chance to do something worthwhile with my life instead of just working and sleeping and working some more. I am 32 years old, Miss Norton. I have been alone for a long time and I am tired of it. I want a family. I want a home. And I want to build those things with you if you will have me." She lowered her hands and looked at him through her tears. His face was open and honest, no trace of deception or hidden motives. Just steady, quiet sincerity. "I do not love you," she whispered. "I am sorry, but I do not. I know. And I am not saying I love you either, not yet. But I like you very much and I respect you, and I think those are good foundations to build on. Love can grow, given time and care. My parents barely knew each other when they married, and they were happy together for 30 years until my father passed. We could have that too. And if love never comes, what then? Then we will still have partnership and respect and shared purpose. That is more than a lot of marriages have." Clara looked down at her hands, at the rough red skin and the broken nails from all the hard work. Then she looked at Xander, at this man who was offering her salvation with no guarantee of anything in return. It was too much. It was too good to be true. But what choice did she have? "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is not a decision I can make lightly, of course. Take all the time you need, but Miss Norton, Clara, if I may call you that," she nodded, "do not let shame or fear make this decision for you. You deserve happiness and security and someone who will stand by you. Please remember that." He touched the brim of his hat and walked away, leaving her alone on the porch with her thoughts spinning and her heart aching in ways she did not fully understand. That night, she talked to Mrs. Fletcher. The older woman listened to everything Xander had said, and when Clara finished, she nodded approvingly. "I told you he was a good man. Better than you deserve, if you want my honest opinion, though I suppose none of us get what we deserve in this life. But is it fair to him? To marry him knowing I do not love him? Fairness has nothing to do with it, child. This is about survival. You have a baby coming in 4 months, no money, no family, and no prospects. Xander is offering you a lifeline. If you are smart, you will grab it with both hands and thank God for the mercy. And if I come to resent him for it, or if he comes to resent me, that is a risk in any marriage. But from what you have told me, he is going into this with his eyes open. He knows what he is getting and he wants it anyway. That is more than most women in your situation could hope for." Clara pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby move. "What do you think I should do?" Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened. "I think you should give him a chance. Not just for your sake or the baby's sake, but for his. He deserves to have his offer taken seriously, not dismissed out of hand. Talk to him. Get to know him. See if you can build something real together. You might surprise yourself." Over the next week, Clara did exactly that. Xander was in town 4 times, and each time she made an effort to talk to him. Nothing improper, just conversations during meals or while she was working and he was helping with some task or another. She asked him about his work, his life, his dreams. And slowly, a picture emerged of a man who was far more than she had realized. Xander had come to Nebraska 6 years ago from Texas, where his family had a small ranch. His father had died suddenly, and his mother had followed a year later from grief, as he put it. His 2 sisters were married with families of their own, and he had not wanted to stay where everything reminded him of what he had lost. So he had come north, hired on at the Double R Ranch, and worked his way up to foreman through sheer competence and determination. He had saved nearly every penny he earned, sending some back to his sisters when they needed it, but keeping most to buy land of his own. He owned 80 acres about 8 miles from town, good grazing land with a creek running through it, and a stand of cottonwood trees for shade. He had been building a house there for the past year, doing the work himself on his days off. It was not finished yet, but the roof was on and the walls were up, and he hoped to have it ready by spring. "I always imagined I would bring a wife there someday," he told her one evening as they stood on the back porch watching the sun set. "Someone to share it with, to help me turn it into a real home. I have the bones of the place, but it needs a woman's touch to make it live." "What about children?" Clara asked, because she needed to know. "Do you want children of your own?" "I would like that very much, but whether they come from my blood or not does not matter to me. A child is a child, and if I am lucky enough to be trusted with raising one, I will do my best by them no matter where they came from." Clara felt something crack open inside her chest. "You really mean that? Every word?" She studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw and the far-seeing eyes that came from years of watching horizons. "Why me, Xander? There must be other women, women without my complications. There are not that many women out here to begin with. And of the few that there are, none of them are you." He turned to look at her directly. "I like the way you move through the world, Clara, like you are carrying a weight but refusing to let it crush you. I like the way you are kind even when you are tired, and the way you stand up straight even when I know you want to curl up and hide. I like your spirit, and I think, given half a chance, I could come to love you very much." Her breath caught. "I do not know if I can promise to love you back. I am not asking for promises, just a chance." Clara closed her eyes and let herself imagine it. A house in the country with a creek and trees. A husband who was kind and steady and offered her acceptance instead of judgment. A future where her child would have a name and a father and a real life. It was more than she had dared dream of in months. "All right," she said quietly. "Yes, I will marry you." Xander's whole face lit up. "You mean it?" "I do, as long as you are certain this is what you want." "I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but strong. They stood there on the porch as the sky darkened to purple, and the first stars came out, and Clara felt something like hope unfurling in her chest for the first time in longer than she could remember. They told Mrs. Fletcher that night, and the older woman surprised them both by tearing up. "I am glad for you both. You are doing the right thing, Xander, and you are getting a good woman. And Clara, you are getting a better man than you probably realize. Be good to each other." They planned to marry as soon as possible. There was no point in waiting, not with Clara's pregnancy advancing and winter coming on. Xander went to speak to the minister at the Methodist church, and Clara spent her free moments letting out her wedding dress, which was actually just her best dress altered with some lace Mrs. Fletcher donated from her own trunk. The wedding was held on a Saturday afternoon in late October with Mrs. Fletcher and 2 of the boarders as witnesses. Clara wore her altered dress and a hat with a bit of ribbon, and Xander wore his best suit and a new shirt he had bought specially. He looked almost unbearably handsome, and when he took her hand and spoke his vows in that deep, steady voice, Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I, Xander James Garrett, take you, Clara Louise Norton, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor you, protect you, and provide for you and any children we may have, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do us part." Clara repeated her own vows, and when the minister pronounced them married and told Xander he could kiss his bride, he leaned down and pressed the gentlest kiss to her lips. It was brief and chaste, but it sent warmth flooding through her whole body. They had a small celebration afterward at the boarding house, with cake that Mrs. Fletcher had made and coffee and a toast to their future. Then, Xander loaded Clara's few belongings into a wagon and helped her up onto the seat beside him. "Ready to see your new home?" he asked. "As ready as I will ever be." The ride took nearly an hour, following a rough track that led north from town across rolling prairie. The land was mostly empty here, just grass and sky and the occasional copse of trees. As the sun began to set, Xander pointed ahead. "There, that is it." Clara followed his gesture and saw a small house sitting near a line of trees, with a creek glinting silver in the fading light. It was a simple structure, just 4 walls and a pitched roof, but there was something solid and welcoming about it. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant Xander had been out here earlier to start a fire. He helped her down from the wagon and led her to the front door. "It is not much yet, but it is sound, and there is room to add on as we need to." Inside, the house was one large room with a fireplace at one end, an iron stove for cooking, a table with 2 chairs, and a bedstead in the corner. The floor was rough planks and the walls were bare, but it was clean and dry and already warming from the fire. "I know it is not fancy," Xander said, sounding nervous for the first time, "but I will keep adding to it. In the spring I will build on another room and eventually we can have a proper parlor and separate bedrooms for the children." Clara turned to look at him, this man who was now her husband. "It is perfect, Xander. Truly, thank you." He smiled, that rare, transformative smile that made her heart skip. "I am glad you think so. Now I should bring in your things and get the rest of the supplies from the wagon. I stocked up on food and such so you would not have to go into town for a while. Thought you might like some time to settle in." He was being tactful, Clara realized, giving her space and time to adjust to this enormous change in her life. She appreciated it more than she could say. That night, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread, they sat by the fire and talked. Xander told her more about his plans for the ranch, how he wanted to build up a small herd of cattle and maybe some horses. Clara told him about her life before, about her parents and her work as a seamstress, and even, haltingly, about the man who had fathered her child and then abandoned her. Xander listened without judgment, his face serious in the firelight. When she finished, he reached over and took her hand. "That man was a fool and a coward, but I am grateful for his foolishness because it brought you here to me. I know that is a selfish thing to say, but it is true. I do not think it is selfish, I think it is kind." When bedtime came, Xander stood and banked the fire, then gestured to the bed. "That is yours, I will sleep on the floor." Clara stared at him. "This is your house and your bed, Xander. I cannot take it from you. You are my wife. The bed is yours. We are married. We are supposed to share a bed." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. "I know, but I do not want to presume. You married me out of necessity, not desire. I will not force my attentions on you." Clara felt a rush of affection for this careful, honorable man. She stood and walked over to him, then took his hand. "You are not forcing anything. And I would like to at least try to make this a real marriage if you are willing. I am not promising anything beyond that, but I would like to try." Xander searched her face, then nodded slowly. "All right, if you are certain." "I am." That night they lay side by side in the narrow bed, not touching at first, both of them stiff with nerves. But as the fire died down and the room grew darker, Clara found herself moving closer, seeking his warmth. Xander put his arm around her, gentle and careful, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what? For giving me and my baby a chance. For not judging me, for being so kind." His arm tightened around her. "You do not have to thank me for basic decency, Clara. That should be the baseline, not the exception. Maybe it should be, but it is not, and I am grateful." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Clara woke in the gray light of dawn, she felt safer than she had in months. The next weeks fell into a new rhythm. Xander rode out to the ranch most days, leaving before dawn and returning at dusk. Clara spent her time learning the house and the land, setting up her small domain. She cooked and cleaned and washed, but at a more reasonable pace than she had at Mrs. Fletcher's. Xander had made it clear that she was to rest when she needed to, that her health and the baby's health were the priority. He was unfailingly kind and patient, never demanding, never pressing. They talked over supper each night, long conversations about everything and nothing. He told her about the cattle and the other ranch hands and the work he was doing. She told him about the garden she wanted to plant in the spring, and the curtains she was sewing for the windows, and the way the baby was moving more and more each day. And slowly, carefully, they built something real. It was not passion, not yet, but it was warm and solid and good. Xander would hold her at night, and she would wake up curled against him, and it felt right in a way that surprised her. She began to look forward to the sound of his horse coming up the track at the end of the day, to the way his face would light up when he saw her. She liked the way he always asked how she was feeling, the way he would rub her aching feet without being asked, the way he talked to her belly and told the baby stories about the ranch. One evening in early November, as they sat by the fire after supper, Xander suddenly said, "I think we should name the baby together. Even though it is not mine by blood, I want to be part of choosing the name, if that is all right with you." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. "I would like that very much. If it is a boy, I have always liked the name Daniel, but if you have another preference, I am open to suggestions. Daniel is a good, strong name, and if it is a girl, what about Sarah? That was my mother's name, but again, only if you like it." "I do like it." "Daniel or Sarah Garrett." "Garrett," Xander repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." Clara reached over and took his hand. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I hope so. I have never done this before, so I will probably make 100 mistakes, but I will try my best." That is all anyone can do. As November turned into December, Clara's belly grew larger and her back ached constantly, and she could not sleep comfortably no matter how she positioned herself. But she was happy in a way she had not expected to be. Xander was attentive and loving, and the house felt like a home. They had started calling each other by their first names without the formality, and sometimes he would kiss her goodnight, soft kisses that made her heart flutter. One night in mid-December, after one of those kisses, Clara found herself pulling him closer instead of letting him pull away. Xander made a questioning sound, and she answered by kissing him again, deeper this time. He groaned softly and cupped her face in his hands, and for the first time since they had married, they came together as husband and wife in truth. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Xander noticed immediately and propped himself up on one elbow, concern written all over his face. "Did I hurt you?" "I tried to be careful." "No, you did not hurt me. I am happy, Xander. I did not think I would ever feel happy again, and now I do, and I do not know what to do with it." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You do not have to do anything with it except feel it. You deserve happiness, Clara. You deserve all the good things in this world. So do you. And I think I am falling in love with you." She felt him go very still, and then he let out a shaky breath. "You do not have to say that if you do not mean it." "I do mean it. It is not the wild, passionate love I thought I felt before. It is something steadier, something deeper. But it is real, and it is growing, and I think it might be the kind of love that lasts." Xander kissed her again, and she could taste salt and realized he was crying too. "I love you too, Clara. I have loved you since that first morning when you made breakfast and looked so fierce and determined despite being exhausted. I have been waiting for you to catch up." She laughed through her tears. "I am sorry I took so long. You took exactly as long as you needed. We have all the time in the world now." The baby came on a cold January night in 1879, during a howling snowstorm that made it impossible for Xander to fetch the doctor from town. Instead, he rode to the nearest ranch and brought back the owner's wife, a capable woman named Martha, who had delivered half a dozen babies of her own. She took charge of the situation with brisk efficiency, boiling water and laying out clean linens and telling Xander to make himself useful by keeping the fire going. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Clara thought she might die from the sheer intensity of it. But Xander stayed by her side the whole time, letting her grip his hand hard enough to bruise, wiping her face with a cool cloth, telling her how strong she was and how proud he was of her. Finally, Just before dawn, the baby came into the world with a furious wail. Martha cleaned him up and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Clara's arms. "You have a son, Mrs. Garrett, a healthy, strong boy." Clara looked down at the red-faced, squalling infant and felt a rush of love so powerful it took her breath away. "Hello, Daniel," she whispered. "Hello, my beautiful boy." Xander leaned over, his eyes shining with tears, and gently touched the baby's tiny fist. Daniel's fingers immediately closed around one of his, and Xander let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is perfect, Clara, absolutely perfect." "He is ours," Clara said, looking up at her husband. "No matter what anyone else says or thinks, he is ours." "Damn right he is," Xander said fiercely. "Daniel James Garrett, born January 18, 1879, my son." Martha smiled as she packed up her supplies. "You two are going to be just fine. I will stop by in a few days to check on you both. In the meantime, rest as much as you can and let your husband take care of you." After she left, Xander sat on the edge of the bed and just stared at Daniel, wonder written all over his face. "I cannot believe he is really here. I cannot believe he is ours. Believe it. You are a father now, Xander." He looked at her, and his expression was so full of love it made her heart ache. "And you are the mother of my son. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for trusting me with this. Thank you for being worthy of that trust." The next weeks were a blur of exhaustion and joy. Daniel was a hungry baby who wanted to eat constantly, and Clara was perpetually tired. But Xander took over all the household chores without complaint, cooking meals and washing clothes and letting Clara sleep whenever she could. He would hold Daniel for hours, walking him around the house when he fussed, talking to him about the ranch and the animals and everything they would do together when he was older. Clara would watch them together and feel her heart swell. This was what family was supposed to look like. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not the giddy, reckless feeling she had mistaken for love back in St. Louis, but this steady, bone-deep certainty that they belonged together. In March, when the snow finally melted and the first hints of spring appeared, Mrs. Fletcher came out to visit. She brought food and supplies and a beautiful quilt she had made for the baby. She held Daniel and cooed over him, and then she pulled Clara aside. "You look happy, child, happier than I have ever seen you." "I am happy. Xander is. He is everything I did not know I needed. He is a good man, and you are good for each other. I am proud of you, Clara. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful. Not many people have that kind of strength. I could not have done it without you. You gave me a chance when no one else would." Mrs. Fletcher waved that away. "I just gave you a place to land. You did the rest yourself. Now, when are you going to bring this baby into town so everyone can meet him? People have been asking after you. Are they talking?" "Of course they are talking. This is a small town. But mostly they are saying nice things. Xander has told everyone Daniel is his son, and no one is going to challenge him on that. He is too well respected, and frankly, people are just happy to see him settled. He was alone too long. Over the next year, life settled into a comfortable routine. Xander added on to the house as promised, building a second bedroom and a proper parlor. He bought a small herd of cattle and began building his own ranch, still working at the Double R but putting more time into his own land. Clara planted a garden and learned to make butter and cheese. Daniel grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, laughing baby who adored his father and brought joy to everything he touched. And Clara fell more deeply in love with her husband with every passing day. The love that had started as a tentative seedling grew into something strong and unshakable. She loved the way Xander would come in from a long day's work and immediately seek out Daniel, tossing him in the air and making him giggle. She loved the way he still rubbed her feet even though she was no longer pregnant. She loved the way he looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, even when she was covered in flour or had spit up on her shoulder. On their first anniversary, Xander gave her a gold wedding band to replace the simple silver one they had used at the ceremony. "I wanted to get you this from the beginning," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "But I did not have the money I have been saving up all year." Clara threw her arms around him. "I love it, but Xander, you did not have to do this." "Yes, I did. You deserve beautiful things, Clara. You deserve everything. I already have everything I need. I have you and Daniel and this life we have built. What more could I possibly want?" He kissed her then, deep and slow, and when they finally pulled apart, he was grinning. "Well, there is one thing we could add." "What is that?" "Another baby, if you are willing. I know Daniel is only a year old, but I have always wanted a big family, and I think you would too." Clara felt a flutter of excitement. "I would like that very much. Let's make a big, noisy, happy family, Xander. Let's fill this house with love and laughter." "That sounds perfect to me." Their daughter was born in the summer of 1880, a tiny thing with dark curly hair and her father's blue-green eyes. They named her Emma Grace, and Daniel was fascinated by his new baby sister. Xander was just as devoted to Emma as he was to Daniel, and Clara marveled at how naturally fatherhood came to him. 2 years later, another son arrived, and they named him Matthew. And 2 years after that, twin girls, Alice and Rose. The house that had once seemed so empty and lonely was now bursting with noise and energy and the chaos that came with 4 young children. But it was a happy chaos. Xander was a patient, loving father who taught his children to ride and rope and respect the land. Clara homeschooled them, teaching them to read and write and do arithmetic. On Sundays, they went into town for church and saw friends and neighbors. Daniel grew up strong and kind, never knowing that Xander was not his biological father because Xander never treated him any differently than the other children. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and hard winters, years when money was tight and they had to scrimp and save. There were illnesses and injuries and the 100 small crises that came with ranching. But through it all, Clara and Xander stood together, their love growing deeper with each passing year. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on the porch of their now substantial house and watched their children playing in the yard. Daniel was 11 now, tall and serious like his father. Emma was a whirlwind of energy at 8. Matthew was a sweet, gentle 6-year-old who loved animals. And the twins were 4, identical in appearance but completely different in personality. "You ever regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Taking me on when I was pregnant and desperate?" Xander looked at her like she had grown a second head. "Regret it?" "Clara, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. I wake up every morning grateful that you said yes. Even though I came to you broken and ashamed." He took her hand and brought it to his lips. "You were never broken. You were bent, maybe, but not broken. And you had nothing to be ashamed of. You were a woman who made a mistake and then had the courage to face the consequences and build a life anyway. That is not shameful. That is heroic." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you, Xander Garrett. I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die. And I love you, Clara Garrett. You came into my life expecting judgment, and I gave you acceptance and grace because that was all I had to offer. But you gave me so much more in return. You gave me everything." They sat there as the sun set, hand in hand, watching their children play and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the evening. The cattle lowing in the distance, the chickens clucking in their coop, the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, built on love and forgiveness and the courage to take a chance on each other. 20 years later, Clara stood in that same spot on the porch, watching her grandchildren play in the yard where her own children had played. Daniel had married a sweet girl from town and had 3 children of his own. Emma had married a rancher from the next county. Matthew was courting the school teacher. The twins were still at home, but not for much longer. Xander came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. They were both graying now, lines etched into their faces from years of sun and wind and laughter. But when Clara looked at him, she still saw the young man who had offered her hope when she had none, who had stood by her when he had every reason to walk away. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am. About how different my life could have been if you had not been the kind of man you are. I am the lucky one. I got to spend 30 years married to the woman I love, raising a family with her, building a life. Not many people get that kind of happiness." Clara turned in his arms and kissed him, a long, slow kiss that held 3 decades of love and partnership. When they pulled apart, she said, "Here is to 30 more. I will drink to that." They went inside to prepare supper for the family gathering they hosted every Sunday now. The house was full of noise and laughter, of children running and adults talking and the clatter of dishes and silverware. Daniel's oldest son, who looked remarkably like Xander, was telling a story that had everyone laughing. Emma's daughter was helping Clara set the table. Matthew's intended was sitting with the twins, talking about wedding plans. Clara looked around at all of it, at this abundant life they had built from almost nothing, and felt profound gratitude. She had come to North Platte expecting judgment and scorn, prepared to face the world's condemnation for her mistakes. Instead, she had found Xander, who had offered her only acceptance and grace. And from that grace, a whole world had grown. A family, a home, a legacy. Love that would endure long after they were both gone. As they all sat down to eat, Xander reached over and took Clara's hand under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. She squeezed back, and they shared a smile that said everything words could not. They had started with nothing but hope and courage and a willingness to try. And they had built a life that was rich beyond measure, not in money or possessions, but in the things that truly mattered. They had built it together, and it was beautiful. The evening wound down as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Nebraska sky in shades of orange and pink. One by one, the family members began to depart, climbing into wagons and onto horses, calling out goodbyes and promising to return next week. Daniel lingered a bit longer, helping his father check on the horses while Clara and his wife cleaned up the kitchen. When everyone had finally gone and the house was quiet again, Clara and Xander sat in their parlor by the fire. It was early autumn of 1898 now, 20 years since they had married, and the evenings were growing cooler. "I have been thinking," Xander said, leaning back in his chair, "about cutting back my hours at the ranch. Daniel is more than capable of taking over most of the operation now. I would like to spend more time here with you. Maybe do some of those things we always said we would do when we had time." Clara looked up from her mending. "What kinds of things?" "Travel a bit. Go see Emma in Montana. Maybe take that trip to San Francisco you have always talked about." "We have worked hard for a long time, Clara. We have earned some time to just enjoy being together." She set down her sewing and moved to sit on the arm of his chair, and he immediately put his arm around her waist. "I would like that. I would like that very much." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Xander said, "Do you remember that first night when I brought you here to the house? You were so scared, trying so hard to be brave. I was terrified. I thought I had made a terrible mistake, marrying a stranger. I kept thinking about all the ways it could go wrong. And instead it went right in ways I never imagined possible. You were patient with me when I needed patience. You were strong when I needed strength. You loved me when I did not know how to love myself. You saved me, Xander." He shook his head. "No, Clara, we saved each other. I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive. You gave me a family and a purpose and more happiness than any one man deserves. We both deserve it. After everything we went through to get here, we both deserve every bit of happiness we have found." The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness, and from far away came the lonely call of a coyote. These were the sounds of home, as familiar to Clara now as her own heartbeat. "I am glad I came to North Platte," she said softly. "I am glad I answered Mrs. Fletcher's advertisement. I am glad you were there at that boarding house, watching me with those kind eyes. I am glad for all of it, even the hard parts, because it led me here to this moment with you." Xander pulled her down into his lap properly, and she settled against him with a contented sigh. "I am glad for all of it, too. Every single moment, good and bad, because they all brought us to this." They stayed like that until the fire burned down to embers. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. Their children would tell their children about Xander and Clara Garrett, about how they met and fell in love and created a legacy of kindness and grace. But for now, they were simply two people sitting by a fire, grateful for the life they had built and the love they shared. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. As winter settled over Nebraska and the ranch, Clara and Xander fell into a peaceful rhythm. Xander did indeed cut back his hours, spending more time at home and teaching Matthew the finer points of ranch management. Clara continued her work, though at a slower pace now that most of the children were grown. She took up quilting more seriously, creating beautiful pieces that she would eventually pass down to her daughters and granddaughters. On Christmas morning of 1898, the house was once again full of family. All 5 of their children were there with their respective families or intended spouses. The twins had both gotten engaged within months of each other, and the wedding planning dominated much of the female conversation. Daniel's children were running wild with their cousins, filling the house with squeals and laughter. After the presents were opened and breakfast was eaten, Daniel asked to speak with his parents privately. They went into the small office that Xander used for ranch business, and Daniel closed the door behind them. "I wanted to talk to you both about something," he said, looking nervous. "About something I learned recently." Clara felt her stomach drop. Somehow she knew what was coming. "I was in town last week, and I overheard some of the old-timers talking. They were talking about when you two got married and how quickly I was born afterward and—" He paused, looking between them. "Is it true that Xander is not my real father?" Clara's eyes filled with tears immediately, but Xander remained calm. He put a hand on Daniel's shoulder and looked him straight in the eye. "I am your real father in every way that matters, son. I have loved you since before you were born. I have raised you and provided for you and been proud of every single thing you have accomplished. The fact that you do not have my blood does not change any of that. But why did you never tell me?" "Because it does not matter," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Because you are ours, Daniel. You have always been ours. I was pregnant when I came to North Platte, yes. Your biological father was a terrible man who wanted nothing to do with you. But Xander chose you. He chose us. He gave you his name and his love and everything a father should give a son. That is what makes him your real father." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he turned to Xander. Did you ever resent me for not being your blood son? Not for one single second. You were my first child, Daniel. You made me a father. How could I ever resent that?" Daniel's eyes were shining with tears now, too. "I do not care what anyone says. You are my father. You have always been my father, and you always will be. Nothing changes that." Xander pulled him into a tight embrace, and Clara joined them, the three of them holding each other and crying happy tears. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel wiped his eyes and laughed. "We should probably get back out there before someone comes looking for us." "Before we do," Clara said, "I need you to know something. I am not ashamed of how you came into this world anymore. I was for a long time. But Xander taught me that there is no shame in loving your child, no matter the circumstances. You are a blessing, Daniel. You have always been a blessing." "Thank you, Ma, for keeping me, for being brave enough to choose me even when it would have been easier not to. There was never any choice. From the moment I knew you existed, you were mine. Nothing could have made me give you up." They returned to the celebration, and if anyone noticed that all three of them had red eyes, no one said anything. The day continued with food and laughter and the warmth of family, and when it was over and everyone had gone home, Clara and Xander stood on their porch looking out at the snow-covered land. "That went better than I thought it would," Xander said. "He is a good man. We raised him well. We did." "All of them. They are all good people, Clara, kind and hardworking and decent. That is because of you. That is because of both of us. We did it together." He pulled her close, and they stood there in the cold, wrapped in each other's arms and in the satisfaction of a life well lived. The years continued to pass, gentle and full. They did take that trip to San Francisco in the spring of 1900, traveling by train and marveling at the modern world that was emerging. They saw the ocean for the first time and stayed in a proper hotel and ate in restaurants. It was a grand adventure, but at the end of it, they were both happy to return home to Nebraska and the ranch and the family that waited for them. Matthew married his schoolteacher in a beautiful summer ceremony, and Alice and Rose had a double wedding the following autumn, marrying two brothers from a neighboring ranch. Emma had 2 more children, bringing Clara's grandchild count to 12. And through it all, Clara and Xander remained constant. They were the center that the family orbited around, the foundation that everything else was built on. They had their disagreements occasionally, as any couple would, but they never went to bed angry. They had their challenges, as any family did, but they faced them together. In the summer of 1905, Mrs. Fletcher passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86. Clara and Xander attended the funeral, and Clara wept for the woman who had given her a chance when no one else would. They took over the boarding house temporarily, helping to settle Mrs. Fletcher's affairs and ensuring it passed to a good family who would continue to run it well. As they worked in the familiar kitchen, Clara said, "I think about that summer all the time. How scared I was. How certain I was that my life was over." "Your life was just beginning," Xander said. "You just did not know it yet, because you showed me. You gave me hope when I had none. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. I wish everyone could be that lucky, to find someone who offers grace instead of judgment. The world would be a better place if they were." They returned home to find their house full once again. It seemed like there was always someone visiting, always grandchildren underfoot, always some celebration or crisis that required their attention. And they loved every minute of it. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a grand party at the ranch. There were decorations and speeches and a beautiful cake that Emma had made. Daniel stood up to make a toast, and the whole room fell silent. "25 years ago, my father made a choice," he said, looking at Xander with love and pride. He chose to take a chance on a woman he barely knew and on a child that was not his. He chose love over judgment, grace over condemnation. And because of that choice, all of us are here today. This entire family exists because one man had the courage and the kindness to offer acceptance to someone who expected anything but. I am proud to be your son, Pa. I am proud of the man you are and the example you set. And I am grateful every day that you chose us. There was not a dry eye in the room, including Xander's. He stood and embraced Daniel, and then he pulled Clara to her feet and held her hand as he addressed their assembled family. 25 years ago, I was a lonely man with an empty house and an empty heart. Then Clara came into my life, and everything changed. She brought light and warmth and love and purpose. She gave me 5 beautiful children and 12 grandchildren, and a life so full of joy, I sometimes cannot believe it is real. I am the lucky one in this marriage. I am the one who got the better end of the deal. I love you, Clara, today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left. Clara could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to say, I love you too, Xander. Thank you for 25 years of happiness. Thank you for being exactly who you are. The party continued late into the evening, with music and dancing and stories shared around the fire. And when everyone had finally left or bedded down in various rooms throughout the house, Clara and Xander retreated to their bedroom and held each other close. 25 years, Clara murmured. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. I know what you mean. Sometimes I still see that scared young woman who climbed down from the stagecoach with nothing but hope and determination. And then I look at you now, so strong and confident and surrounded by love, and I am amazed at the journey. We took that journey together, every step of the way. They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done for 25 years, as they would continue to do for as many years as they were granted. As they moved into their later years, Clara and Xander slowed down considerably. Xander turned over complete control of the ranch to Daniel and Matthew, who ran it as partners. He and Clara stayed in the main house, which had been expanded over the years into a comfortable homestead with room for visiting family. They spent their days in quiet contentment. Xander would read the newspaper on the porch while Clara worked on her endless quilting projects. They would walk down to the creek in the evenings when the weather was fine, moving slowly now but still hand in hand. They would host Sunday dinners and delight in their growing number of great-grandchildren. In the spring of 1910, Clara fell ill with pneumonia. For a terrifying week, Xander sat by her bedside, holding her hand and refusing to leave even to eat or sleep. The doctor was not optimistic, but Clara was stubborn. She fought her way back to health, determined not to leave Xander yet. When she was finally well enough to sit up and talk, the first thing she said was, "You look terrible." Xander laughed, a sound of pure relief. "You gave me a scare, woman. I thought I was going to lose you." "Not yet. We still have time." "How much time?" "As much as we are given, and I plan to make the most of every moment." She recovered fully, though it took months. During her convalescence, Xander read to her every evening, everything from newspapers to novels to letters from their children and grandchildren. It became a habit they maintained even after she was well, a quiet evening ritual that they both treasured. On Clara's 60th birthday in 1916, the entire family gathered to celebrate. There were now 17 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The house and yard were packed with people, and the noise was tremendous, and Clara could not have been happier. As she looked around at all the faces, at this sprawling family that had grown from a single act of kindness and courage, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Daniel was there with his grandchildren, a patriarch in his own right now. Emma and her large brood had traveled from Montana. Matthew and his wife had 6 children who were currently running wild with their cousins. The twins and their families completed the picture, 3 generations of Garretts all together in one place. Xander appeared at her elbow with a glass of lemonade and a smile. "How does it feel to be 60? "Like I am the luckiest woman alive. Look at all of this, Xander. Look at what we created. We did good, did we not? We did better than good. We did extraordinary." That evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, they sat on their porch and watched the sun set. It was their favorite time of day, when the world seemed to pause and it was just the two of them. "You ever think about that day when I asked to court you?" Xander asked. "When you turned me down the first time? All the time. I think about how close I came to ruining everything out of fear and pride. If you had not asked again, if you had not been so persistent and patient, you would have found another way. You are too strong to have been defeated, Clara. You would have survived and thrived somehow. Maybe. But I am glad I did not have to find out. I am glad I said yes to you. I am glad for every choice that brought us to this moment right here." Xander reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his 70 years. "I am glad too. Every single day I am glad." They sat there until the stars came out. 2 people who had weathered storms and celebrated joys, who had built a life from nothing but hope and love. They had been young once, uncertain and afraid. Now they were old, their hair white and their bodies tired, but their love was as strong as ever. Perhaps stronger, because it had been tested by time and had not faltered. The years that followed were peaceful and slow. They celebrated birthdays and weddings and the births of new grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They mourned when members of their family or friends from town passed away. They watched the world change around them, with automobiles becoming more common and talk of war in Europe and new technologies that seemed like magic. But through it all, their love remained constant. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, they renewed their vows in the small church in North Platte with their entire family in attendance. Daniel walked his mother down the aisle, and Matthew stood as his father's best man. The twins decorated the church with flowers. Emma made the cake. And when the minister asked if they took each other, their voices rang out strong and clear. "I do." Afterward, at the celebration at the ranch, Xander pulled Clara aside for a private moment. They walked down to the creek where they had spent so many evenings over the years, and he turned to face her. "40 years ago, I made you a promise. I promised to honor you, protect you, and provide for you and any children we might have. I promised to stand by you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do us part. I have tried my best to keep those promises, Clara. I hope I have succeeded." Clara cupped his weathered face in her hands. "You have exceeded every promise, Xander Garrett. You have given me more than I ever dared dream of. You have loved me through everything, the good times and the bad, and you have never once made me feel anything but cherished. I am so grateful for you, so grateful for this life we built together. We are not done yet. We still have time." "Yes, we do, and I want to spend every moment of it with you." They kissed then, a soft kiss that held 4 decades of love and partnership. And then they walked back to join their family, hand in hand as always. Xander passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1921, at the age of 73. He had been working in the barn that afternoon, still insisting on helping with small tasks despite his children's protests. He had come in for supper, eaten heartily, told Clara she looked beautiful, kissed her good night, and simply not woken up the next morning. Clara held his hand as the doctor confirmed what she already knew, and she did not cry at first. She just sat there, memorizing his face one last time, thinking about the 43 years they had shared and feeling grateful for every single one. The funeral was enormous. It seemed like everyone in the county came to pay their respects to Xander Garrett, the man who had built a reputation for fairness, kindness, and integrity. Person after person came up to Clara and told her stories about times Xander had helped them, times he had shown them grace when they expected judgment, times he had been the better man in situations that would have made others bitter. "He was the best man I ever knew," Daniel said in his eulogy, his voice breaking. "He taught me what it means to be a father, what it means to be a husband, what it means to be a man of honor. He chose me when he did not have to, and he loved me like I was his own blood. I hope to be half the man he was." Clara made it through the funeral with dignity, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But that night, alone in the house that now felt too big and too empty, she finally let herself cry. She cried for the man she had loved for 43 years, for the loss of his steady presence, for all the days they would not get to share. But even through her grief, she felt grateful. So many people never got to experience love like theirs. So many people went through life without finding their person. She had been blessed beyond measure to have Xander for as long as she did. In the months that followed, Clara stayed on at the ranch. Daniel and Matthew tried to convince her to move in with one of them, but she refused. This was her home, the place where she and Xander had built their life. She was not ready to leave it yet. She spent her days quilting and reading and writing letters to her far-flung family. She spent her evenings on the porch, watching the sunsets and talking to Xander as if he were still there beside her. And in a way, he was. She felt his presence in every corner of the house, in every tree they had planted together, in every grandchild who had his eyes or his smile. Clara lived for 5 more years after Xander's death, surrounded by love and family. She got to meet 12 more great-grandchildren and saw 2 of her grandchildren married. She finished 23 quilts in those years, ensuring that every member of the family had one to remember her by. And when her time came, on a warm spring morning in 1926, she went peacefully, sitting in her favorite chair on the porch with a quilt on her lap and a smile on her face. Daniel found her there when he came by for his daily visit, and he knew immediately that she was gone. At her funeral, held in the same church where she had married Xander 48 years earlier, Emma spoke on behalf of all the children. "Our mother was the strongest woman I have ever known. She faced impossible circumstances with courage and determination, and she never let shame or fear dictate her choices. She taught us to be kind, to work hard, to stand by our convictions, and to love fiercely. She showed us that family is not just about blood, but about choice and commitment and showing up for each other day after day. We are who we are because of her, and we will carry her legacy forward for generations to come." They buried Clara next to Xander in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone read, "Xander James Garrett, 1848–1921, and Clara Louise Garrett, 1856–1926. Beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents. They chose love." And below that, added by Daniel in tribute to the parents who had raised him and loved him, "She came expecting judgment. He offered only acceptance and grace. Together they built a legacy of love." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from father to son to grandson. The house was expanded and modernized, but the bones of what Xander had built remained. And every generation told the story of Xander and Clara, of how they met and fell in love and created something beautiful from almost nothing. The story became a family legend, told to children and grandchildren as an example of what love should look like. Not perfect or easy, but strong and steady, and built on a foundation of acceptance and grace. A love that chose to see the best in each other, that offered second chances, that believed in redemption and new beginnings. And long after the last person who had known Xander and Clara personally had passed away, their legacy lived on in the family they had created and the love they had shared. A love that had started with a simple offer of acceptance to a woman who expected judgment, and had grown into something that touched generations. It was a love story for the ages, played out in the wild west of Nebraska, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures come not from seeking glory or riches, but from simply choosing to love well and to be kind when kindness is needed most. The end.